Fondation Jean-Jaurès.
Penser pour agir.
Kosovo's quest for international recognition has hit again the headlines last week on the occasion of a meeting, an important one in Ohrid. It has been a way of the cross since Kosovo declared independence 15 years ago. Serbia has pledged once again it will never recognize its independence. 5 member states of the European Union, 4 of NATO, also refused to recognize Kosovo's independence. Their position on this question de facto backs Russia and China's principled opposition in the UN Security Council. Kosovo's margin of maneuver in this geopolitical game, of course, is rather limited, but it is not inexistent. In culture, in sports, Kosovo has stepped up its diplomatic efforts to increase participation in international contests and make some yields in sovereignty gains. So that's small progresses we will discuss today with Juan Manuel Montoro. Juan, you are a researcher, you're a journalist, you're a consultant residing in Santiago de Compostela in Spain. You're also teaching in Uruguay. You come from Uruguay. You published in the end of last year, together with Georg Kiris, associate professor in Birmingham, a study entitled Kosovo Sport Diplomacy. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Florent. Thank you very much for the invitation. We're very grateful for this opportunity of dissemination. I am also talking on behalf of my colleague George. We're very happy to be here in your program. And well, we're also very happy to talk about Kosovo and about how Kosovo situation also help us understand this relation between sports and international politics.
So precisely, Juan, can you tell us, in general terms, why is the relation between sports and international politics or sports and sovereignty so interesting to you?
Yes. First of all, we have to understand that an important part of this relation is that sports help us understand that we live in a world of nations, that we live in an international systems whose disparate units are individual sovereign states that assemble a system of, we are expected to have at least one nationality. We are also witnessing different processes of transnationalism. That's true, but specifically in sports, athletes and allegiances still follow the logic of the nation state. And because of that, sports provides, it's not the only platform. There are lots of platforms in Europe. Here we have also the Eurovision Song Contest. We have the different array of flags in our emoji keyboards. We have ISO norms. We have supranational bodies. We have a lot of platforms, semiotic platforms, we could say, in which we can understand whether an individual item, whether is part of that system or it is not. So when we see the list of participants on football tournaments or sports tournaments in general, we can also understand if that given country, no matter how disconnected, how unrelated is to our nationhood, can claim a symbolic place on that list, on that selected list of sovereign states. So from one point of view, that's a very interesting angle of how sports in a, we could say, low cultural level, for many years, for decades, sports have passed unnoticed for social scientists, and this fortunately is changing. For many time, we can understand sports not so as a leisure activity, but also as a very political dimension of life in which these elements are at stake. From the other part, it is a paradox that whereas sports provide such a standardized items, such reified in a way, flags, anthems, a series of protocols that needs to be followed in the same fashion once and once again. On the other hand, they also can move belonging, collective identities in a very touching, in a very emotional level. So we also can understand that our sense of belonging is being at stake when our national team is playing in an international tournament. I come from Uruguay, and we are pretty aware of this because most part of our foundational storytellings come from this aspect of cultural life, let's say.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think yes. On these semiotic platforms, as you call them, this is interesting indeed, where you have all these symbols and the markers of nations. How successful? So in sports, because this is what you covered more specifically in your study. How successful has Kosovo been in pushing for or yielding sovereignty gains and trying to gain participation, visibility, recognition, soft one. So what are the progresses? Can you sketch a little bit Kosovo's efforts, and progress, and maybe also stalemates and limitations?
Sure. It was stunning, this progress, specifically if we compare how was Kosovo's struggle to get integration into other platforms, non-sporting platforms. Our research, which is framed under the Kosovo Research and Analysis Framework from the Kosovo Foundation for Open Societies, showed also that being part of the International Olympic Committee, being part of FIFA and several other international sporting governing bodies enabled Kosovo to act as a state. And this is also part of the first question, which is important, because many times in international analysis, we analyze a lot about recognition, but here in sports and in other supranational bodies, what matters is membership. And also being member of a collective body like this put you in a place in which you can demand other fellow members to give a fair treatment. So if we analyze, if we see the developments of Kosovo's statehood and Kosovo's effort to build institutions that could be perceived as any other country, as a regular country or state in the world, we can see that the Declaration of Independence happened in 2008. So to make this story short, not to go too far on path, but independence came in 2008. Kosovo struggled for some time to get integrated into UNESCO, into sports federation, finally achieved, and this is quite interesting, it achieved membership to the International Olympic Committee before FIFA. I mean, membership affiliation into the Olympic family came in 2014 and FIFA came 2 years later. This is important. Why? Because if we compare lists of participants, lists of members of both institutions, which are probably the most important global actors in sporting, in international sport, we see that the list of members of the Olympic family is more restricted than that of FIFA football. We see lots of regions, non-sovereign entities competing at football, international football. That could be many cases of, I don't know, Gibraltar, for example, could be the cases of many islands in the Pacific, many cases in the Caribbean, for example, former British colonies or actual British overseas departments, territories. But in the case of the Olympic family, it is specifically, according to a clause in the Olympic Charter, that it forbids non-sovereign entities to take part in the Olympic family. This is quite new. This happened after the 80s, between the 80s and the 90s, because in order to pursue for Olympic admission, you have to follow two criteria. One of them is being accepted beforehand in at least 5 sporting associations. This is quite difficult for highly unrecognized states like Abkhazia, Northern Cyprus, Somaliland. I mean, lots of states that could work as de facto state, but they don't have the support of important other members of the international community. But once you reach these 5 admissions, that we also discover that even the politics in different levels of geopolitical strategies and alliances also are mirrored in different sporting federations. For example, in one occasion in which Turkey is stronger, Russia is stronger, or China is stronger, this geopolitical influence can also have effect on how this sporting federation is governed. So once you got these 5 international affiliations, you also have to have this acceptance into international community. How the International Olympic Committee understood what recognition from the international community is very interesting, because they decoupled being a sovereign state from being a UN member. normally we understand that sovereign states are the ones that are member of the United Nations. And this was not the criterion that applied the International Olympic Committee. It was different. It was a majority of United Nations members recognize Kosovo. So this is also why, after some years, started a campaign from Serbia of the recognitions of many remote, not specifically for this, but because there was some hints that one criteria of either whether admitting or rejecting Kosovo's application into international fora was the majority or minority of UN members that recognize or don't recognize Kosovo's statehood.
It's very interesting how to see how the efforts of Kosovo on the international scene are crystallizing themselves. So in this, for instance, as you mentioned, the International Olympic Committee. So it is one way where Kosovo sees, or gives visibility a little bit to the efforts it engages towards recognition, concrete ones. And of course, it has implications, domestic implications. We can imagine for Kosovo when it becomes indeed a part of the IOC or the FIFA and other federations, international ones. How has it been used to bridge together Kosovo society? How important is it within society, this kind of soft recognition, if we could say?
Yes, I think this is a very interesting case to understand specifically this part, this angle. In our paper, we didn't have, for logical limitations and other constraints, as both of us are non-Kosovars, so we have to be very cautious on approaching this issue. But interestingly, the story of Kosovo reflects, and other countries, of course, but reflects how internal dynamics and external factors are not so separated. There's not a fixed boundary on how internal society builds. I mean, in this case, there was like a dialogue between how developments in the international scene also affect the internal development of how Kosovo citizenship needs to be understood. To start with, this happened because of a very pragmatic issue. Being able to compete internationally in sport brought Kosovo a number of experiences that in other fora were just neglected. For example, going to Spain. Just 2 years ago, Kosovo athletes, sports footballers, were able to travel, to arrange a visa. When Kosovars try to travel throughout Europe, they got a visa that says specifically minus Spain. So there was a new level of unblock these relations that after that has a lot of effects in the internal, because you can exchange, you can interact with non-recognizers in a new level. After that, what is also interesting, in Kosovo, there's also this discussion of who are we, which are our symbols, the Albanian flag or the Kosovo flag, and lots of very interesting discussions. Interestingly, the fact of having to defend the Kosovo flag internationally, because you are very aware of, you are competing in a non-recognizer, this Kosovo flag is being portrayed or not, the fact of getting this level of awareness of this issue also brings emotional attachments to these brand new symbols. So if the problems in the foreign agenda, in Kosovo's foreign agenda, are quite related to how to get normalized relations with Serbia, especially with Serbia, in the internal phase of how sports evolve or how this discussion evolved, is not necessarily with Serbia. Could be with Serbia if we understand that there's a kind of multi-ethnic state, that Kosovo is a multi-ethnic state that also needs to include Kosovo Serbs and from other minorities in Kosovo. But interestingly, the question is whether, probably it's too early to pose this question, and probably it is not me nor George the ones who have to attempt an answer to this question, but whether in the long term, this kind of public stances like football, like culture, like music, would help Kosovo to develop a fully fledged identity that somewhat could be also different from Albania too. So this is something that is very it's an ongoing process. So it's very soon to understand which is the direction that this trend is going, and everything could be reversed. So it's also an interesting moment to be very attentive to how this development happens.
And a last question, you mentioned that the semiotic arenas, of course, are a little bit different, and logics behind the decisions to accept or not. New members are also different. What is the next semiotic arena? Which Kosovo is striving for joining, or where it's not so easy, but would deliver some kind of new message also domestically, as you said. What is the next one?
I think that starting from this point, I mean, of course, Kosovar society is struggled for a number of lots of problems, like every other society in this uncertain global world. But specifically from a semiotic point of view, to understand which are the challenges of being accepted or being seen as one state among the other, is interesting how for the majority of us, for many people who, like you or me, come from states whose sovereignty is out of question, the fact of trying to look for different platforms on whether my state is present or not, both theoretically and both empirically, it's interesting to observe how these evolve in different aspects. For example, Kosovo launched a decade ago a digital diplomacy strategy, in which it was not based on asking other states to recognize, but asking Microsoft, Alibaba, Sony, different private bodies to accept to put Kosovo into their databases. So there are a lot of stances of, we could say, according to one specialist, Michael Billig, international banal internationalism that goes unnoticed for many of us, but for people who live in a state that whose sovereignty is far from being black or white. It's a matter of discussion. These are very interesting to observe how they evolve, and how these interplay of expectation and outcomes also produce different results in this society.
Thank you, Juan. Thanks a lot for all these explanations and sharing these very interesting results about this study, which we advise a lot. Thank you, and good day.
Thank you very much, Florent. Thank you also to CAIFOS for this opportunity of doing research, and also thank you very much for all interviewees of this project and people from Kosovo who are always very eager to discuss about these issues.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Toutes les conférences et entretiens de la Fondation Jean-Jaurès sont à retrouver en podcast sur notre site jeanjaurès.org et sur notre chaîne YouTube.
Fondation Jean-Jaurès.
Pensez pour agir.